And Craig Smoak.
Bruce Feldman, who's a heck of a writer, a national writer for theathletic.com, every year now has been, for 20 years, nearly, the college football freaks list in 2023. And this one has a bunch of great nuggets. If you don't have the Athletic subscription, it's the one that I use. It's great. A lot of us do. And he joins us now on 365 Sports. Bruce, thank you very much. And I know this is an arduous task. How much now do you get even more feedback than ever than when you first started this from people trying to make sure you know about stories of players?
First, thanks for the kind words. And, it's hard to compare because back when I did it, 2004, the first year, I was doing it at ESPN, and it was on ESPN.com, and it was 10 guys. And I just don't remember how much, there was definitely feedback, but it wasn't instantly because that was pre-Twitter. And so, I'd post it and I'd probably get comments into my inbox, but not like now where it's just an avalanche of stuff that comes in. And I feel like it pretty much that changed probably about 10 years ago, and it's grown every year. And what's really different now for me is, especially being out to games every week, and especially when I was, doing sideline reporting every week, I'd be on the field before games and warm-ups, and NFL scouts are out there. And every week I'd have somebody come up and talk to me about it. And that was really cool. And I go to the combine every year and get a lot of feedback from it there. And, it takes a long time to put everything together, but I love doing it because there's nothing that gets me more excited about, with the season just being around the corner now.
Bruce, one of the things I've always liked about it, it's one of the better ways to find out about some of the dudes that we have no idea. I mean, everybody's heard of Jared Verse and Marvin Harrison Jr., and, they've seen mock drafts way too early for this year. But when you start out the list this year with a true freshman, you've got a guy from Harvard, a guy from Holy Cross, Southeast Missouri State, among the rest. Like, that really does kind of show you how deep and wild the talent is all across the country, doesn't it?
It does. And probably in, the last half dozen years or so, I've really, a lot of those scouts who I get in conversations with, now they become also good resources. And so every year I'd have long conversations with Jim Nagy and his staff from the Senior Bowl, and we kick ideas around of, maybe share information of what we heard, either from talking to coaches or talking to players. And that has helped. But what's interesting is a few years back, I had a cornerback from UTSA whose measurables were like ridiculous, right? And this is Tariq Woolen. He ended up, lighting it up in the combine and doing pretty much exactly what we had read. We had said he did. And he had a great rookie year this past year for the Seahawks. And now I have another guy who is really under the radar in terms of somebody, even when I talk to draft scouts, they don't know this name, but it's a guy who's going to be a first-year starter. It's another kid from Texas who is at Wyoming now. And when I heard about him first and was told about him by coaches at Wyoming, I was like, man, this guy sounds a lot like Tariq Woolen. And, to be able to get out on the front end and kind of, there's an element of discovery, and there's also, I think that's the fun part of this, because as we've seen, and we see every year, there's great football players that are all over the country, and maybe some guys are late bloomers. Maybe there's a reason they fell through the cracks. To be able to spotlight some of them is one of the coolest things about this thing.
Bruce, I remember, when Bryles was at Baylor, they had just an affinity for freaky athletes, and it seemed like they were kind of a regular on this list. And it's been very hit or miss, I think, since then. But a couple of guys, and actually would have been three if not for a transfer with Gary Bohannon, who's now at USF, but Monterey Baldwin and Gabe Hall both making the list this year. Just your kind of thoughts on the information you received about those guys and just sort of the feeling coming out of Waco about, some of the athleticism that they have on this team.
Yeah, Gabe Hall I had last year. He's almost 300 pounds, 6'6". To have that height and that kind of length and still bench press 500 pounds and run almost 20 miles per hour on a GPS. Again, this guy is almost 300 pounds. That's remarkable. So he was an easy choice as a repeat guy. Monterey Baldwin obviously was, the most productive receiver Baylor had last year, hitting almost 23 miles per hour in game on a touchdown last year. I mean, usually these GPS numbers that I'm getting are guys who are in training, not, in football pads and in a helmet. And he's a smaller guy at 5'9", 164, but incredible strength. I mean, to be a 405-pound bencher when you're under 200 pounds is really impressive, but to be 164 pounds, that's something. So, it's not like you mentioned, there was a bunch over the years in Waco, and these two guys are certainly deserving of some of the spotlight on this.
Bruce, how many times do you get information on a player from whoever it is, and you have to almost double take that can't possibly be true?
I had, it's funny. I had one really recent in terms of this story is coming out first thing Tuesday morning. When I say first thing, I mean, I'm on the West Coast, but I think they're publishing it at 2 a.m. my time. And I got a DM from a coach I know at an ACC school telling, hey, when are you going with this? Because when's the free list come out? Because I got a guy, and it was like a 45-inch vertical jump guy. And I said, I got to talk to your strength coach about this. It was almost like, it's the coach telling me this, but at the same time, I want somebody else to kind of echo it. And it was like 10:30 at night. And I said to the guy, I was like, fortunately, we're not publishing till the morning, but unfortunately, it's almost 11 o'clock your time, and I need to get somebody on the phone. And I ended up texting the guy, and the guy called, and the strength coach picked right up. And sure enough, some of this, freaky stuff, you always are a little skeptical until, and the more schools you've talked to, and I because I've been doing this for so long, you kind of know who has a track record of being really legit, and maybe some of the other places, a handful here or there, maybe you take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But this year I had 6 guys. I've never had that many from one school, from Penn State on there. And they were all in the top 50. And the truth of it is, I've had guys from Penn State put up crazy numbers, and people used to scoff at it. And then you see they go to the combine, whether it's Saquon Barkley or Jason Owe or Micah Parsons or Pete Kasicki, and they back it up. And some of them even exceed the freak numbers. So I was like, all right, I'm going to recognize it. And that's kind of the beauty. And when you've done it for so long, you kind of have a good sense of who you really keep an eye on, and maybe who's you maybe have to find some more sourcing for.
You, I mentioned earlier, you have a true freshman, Nichols Harbor from South Carolina as your number 1, and he hasn't even done anything against other college athletes yet. This is just what he's done already. Did you wrestle with the decision to put him at number 1 because of that, or was it just, holy cow, this guy's just the freak of all freaks?
I did wrestle with it a little bit, but the thing that was different for me was this guy was a legit big-time track guy in high school. He ran 10.22. He is an enormous athlete. He is 6'5". He's now 243 pounds. The video we have of him running in a race, it looks like he's running with children. Except the guy next to him is a big-time track guy, too. It's just he's a head and shoulders smaller. And when I talked to not just Shane Beamer, the head coach there, but Jody Wright is a tight end coach, and he had spent a long time on the Alabama staff. So he was around when Alabama had Julio Jones, who's obviously, big receiver who's freak in his own right. And the Heisman Trophy winner, Derrick Henry, who's a supersized running back. Both guys had run track and had success at it. And this guy's bigger than them, much bigger than Julio Jones. And he ran a full second faster in the 100. And for anybody who's pays any attention to track, if you're running a full second faster than somebody, that's a remarkable difference. So yes, he's a true freshman, but I just felt like this is the one who I'd probably break it on.
How many players over the years have come from the Ivy League, like Thor Griffith, the linebacker, or defensive tackle at number 8 from Harvard?
I had Andre Yoshevich last year in the top 20. He's a receiver who was at Princeton, who's also, a Ivy League champion in track. And he's big, he's fast. He's not, certainly not as big as Harbor, but he's, 6'3", about 210. And he went to the Bengals in the draft, and he's created a lot of buzz in training camp now. And Thor Griffith, who was like former youth hockey star and then a standout wrestler, and might be the strongest guy in college football, to be honest. And he also runs a 4.95 40. I suspect he will be an interesting one to keep an eye on in the draft process this spring.
Bruce Feldman, The Athletic. Fox Sports is just over 100. The Freaks list on theathletic.com is annual rankings that came out earlier this week.
Bruce, do you get like random submissions too that just kind of out of the blue?
I do, yeah. One of the guys, I got a linebacker on there from a really good FCS program, Holy Cross. I think they're preseason top 5 right now, and he's a really good player. And it's somebody who had reached out to me. I don't know if it was him first, and then somebody, and then all of a sudden, because he was on there last year, we've had some back and forths. And he had to rehab his elbow. He missed a bunch of last season, but there's certainly a bunch of guys who will say, hey, what about this guy or what about that guy? And occasionally it'll be a player himself. But, I think as this thing's gotten so big, people are always, pointing out somebody that maybe you didn't know. In fact, I had somebody who was on my radar, just like kind of in a file, like for the off season. And it was a former standout in track who ended up he's more of a baseball player, but he was a walk-on last year, a receiver at USC. And there's crazy footage of him doing some, like J.R. Ryder kind of dunk contest dunks, and he's 6 feet. And I was like, he led USC in batting, had like 16 triples this year. And I was like, I probably need to find a spot for him. And then as we got into the year, somebody told me, it was like, he's going to focus just on baseball. So much for him being on the Freaks list. But he's a guy who really probably wasn't going to crack the rotation at USC, but he definitely was a freak athlete. And so what do you do with guys like that who are just kind of on the roster, but probably not going to be much of a factor when the actual season happens?
Bruce, it would take all day to go through the list, much less just the Big 12 folks, but I am noticing some pretty good Texas Tech representation as well. TCU's got their guys, and Texas for now has got their guys and whatnot, but there's a lot of buzz coming out of West Texas right now surrounding Joey McGuire. We know that staff really well and their development and all of that, but what do you make of just kind of the athletes building up now out in Lubbock, Texas?
Yeah, no doubt. Look, when Rule was at Baylor, I thought he did an amazing job of finding speed. And then they did a really good job, obviously, developing it. And I think that Joey McGuire, who obviously, as you guys know, spent a bunch of time around there, he knows that. And I think not only do they have a bunch of these guys, and some of them, one of them was at Texas and one of them was a transfer from ULM, but I think they have their antenna up for those kinds of caliber of special speed guys. And they recruited a ton in this signing class this past winter. And so we did a game, my Fox crew last year, where we were in, I think, I'm trying to remember if it was a TCU game, but maybe it was TCU against Texas Tech. And I remember talking to Tim DeRuiter and a couple of the other coaches on the staff, and you're looking around, and I knew Tyree Wilson was a guy everybody was buzzing about, but there were just a bunch of other big athletic-looking guys, and I was like, man, this looks a lot different, especially because a lot of them were defensive guys. It looked a lot different back when Cliff Kingsbury was trying to get out of the wreckage of what he inherited there, and they had nobody on defense. And now they definitely have some guys over there.
You have a couple of corners from Florida A&M. Was it almost like just impossible to split them up?
It really was. There's such splitting hairs when you look at their numbers. They're almost identical. One guy's slightly bigger and slightly faster, so I included him above. But yeah, and I mean, both when you have guys who are broad jumping almost 11 feet, it's you're probably going to find a way onto this list some way. And they have just some other really impressive measurables. They're two of the more touted defensive players in the SWAC.
Would it on Florida A&M? Would it surprise you to see Willie Simmons get a big job here in the next few years?
We'll see. I think he's had a bunch of really good talent there. I don't know what eventually comes open. It wouldn't, nothing would surprise me because, look, certainly, it would help him if Deion hits the ground running at Colorado. You have a guy who's making the move from an HBCU, and obviously Deion is a big name and has spent time, in the NFL and everything else. But it's possible. I think that we've seen coaches from, right now, whether it's Lance Leipold or Kalen DeBoer, guys who had a lot of success at the lower division and springboarded into FBS football and had success. And I think when that works, I think people are looking for the next version of it.
Last thing, Bruce, it looks like, at least it's simmering, always will be college football realignment. We had you on a few weeks back, and my goodness, the Pac-12 finally broken away. They're trying to figure it out. Has this been once-in-a-lifetime realignment crazy for you as someone who's been covering college football as long as you have?
I think just seeing the Pac-12 and the former Pac-10 just basically gutted the way it has. This isn't like, having the big, like, you had the Southwest Conference, and I'll be honest, I was not covering the sport at that point. Like, I grew up seeing some of those teams, certainly, but that wasn't like I was covering it back then in the media. But, like, you haven't seen conferences who have that kind of length, like the Pac-12 does, just completely collapse. We've seen, like, the Big East, but the Big East wasn't around for 100 years, right? We've seen some of these conferences come and go, but not like this. I mean, to see USC and UCLA obviously were the gold standard schools of the Pac-12, and then for there not to be there, and then finally when Oregon and Washington bail out of there because they know it's not viable. I mean, it's pretty surreal.
Bruce, thank you. Great stuff. It's the College Football Freaks List 2023 rankings with a true freshman at number 1, South Carolina wide receiver Nicholas Harbor.
Yeah, there's a